Yes. All right, hello and welcome to the Sierra Speaker Series brought to you by California State Parks and the Sierra State Parks Foundation. My name is Jeremy Lynn and I'm a California State Park interpreter based at Donner Memorial State Park. The Sierra Speaker Series shares and connects the rich cultural and natural history of the area to the community. Please donate to the Sierra State Parks Foundation today to support the interpretation, restoration, and preservation of the park system in the Lake Tahoe Donner area. Your tax-deductible donation will be kept locally and applied to priority projects. Please visit sierrastateparks.org to see how you can get involved and access a full list of all the upcoming events. With me today are Elke Reimer and Jennifer Hemmen. Elke and Jennifer are part of a 4-member team of ultra-distance athletes who share a passion for history and aim to honor the lives and courage of the Forlorn Hope members of the historic Donner Party of 1846. So this modern Forlorn Hope expedition departed on December 16th, the same date in 1846 when 17 Donner Party emigrants set out on snowshoes in a desperate attempt to cross the mountains and reach a settlement near Sacramento 100 miles away, just to find help. After enduring punishing physical and mental emotional hardship, only 7 survived. Jennifer and Elke are experienced ultra runners and have been kind enough to talk about the motivation and preparation behind their challenging 100-mile trek from Donner Lake to Johnson's Ranch outside of Sacramento. Thank you both for your time.
It's great to be here, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
All right. All right, so we'll start off with Elke. Can you please introduce yourself and share with us your background in ultra running and also your motivation to join this expedition?
Yeah, again, my name's Elke, and I live in Auburn, California, just down the road from Donner State Park. I've lived in this area of Placer County for over 40 years at this point. Makes me feel a little old saying that, but I certainly don't feel old. So I know the area really well. I've lived not only in Auburn, but also in Colfax and in Alta as well. And I may revisit that a little bit later in our conversation because our trek went through some of those areas. So it was pretty neat. I didn't grow up running, to be honest. I grew up more on the bike, on a bicycle, did a lot of centuries, things like that. But then once I had kids, that was a bit time consuming. Didn't really have time to get on the bike and go out and explore for hours. So I picked up running when my kids were pretty young, and I really wasn't until my mid-30s that I started doing that. And started running 5Ks and 10Ks. And then probably within the first year of running, I ran my first marathon, and that was Napa Valley Marathon. It really humbled me and beat me up pretty good. So I hit the trails after that and met up with some local women running legends, and they sort of sucked me into the family. And probably within my first year of running ultras, signed up for Western States 100, and my name was drawn that first year. So 2007 was my first 100-miler. I've ran probably about 40 ultras since then. And then let's see, motivation for joining the expedition. Well, let's see, I've got a lot of experience in the High Sierra. That's really my passion. I race a lot less and do a lot more adventures in the High Sierra, climbing 13,000, 14,000 foot peaks, sometimes by myself, sometimes with a friend or two. And also recently in the last 3 or 4 years, got into snow camping. So that includes a multi-day trip from China Wall to Olympic Valley. And actually it was on that trip that I carried with me the Indifferent Stars Above, which is the book of the Donner Party and the Forlorn Hope, and borrowed that from Tim, one of the guys on our team, and brought that with me because you end up going to bed so early in the middle of winter when you're snow camping. So I was reading that book, and my friend who was with me at the time doing this trek, we both just marveled over how much we had with us in terms of gear and food, shelter, everything else that the Donner Party did not have the privilege of having, and in particular, the Forlorn Hope. And funny that 4 years later, I was invited to join this team really late in the game. So I only had about 5 weeks notice to prepare for this mentally. But Jenn invited me to be part of the team. And after thinking about it for a couple of days, I was completely 100% on board, knowing that this was all about honoring the forlorn hope. And this wasn't a race or anything else like that. So,
wow, so it all happened pretty quickly.
It all happened really
Yeah.
quickly, a little scary, a little intimidating, but once I owned that and knew that we were going to have some support out there, which I'm really thankful for, it kind of changed that. But what a great opportunity, and in hindsight, an incredible memory that I'll have the rest of my life.
Wow, what an impressive accomplishment. Well, it looks like Jennifer popped off. Hopefully she makes it back on. So when she gets on, we'll ask her some questions. But in the meantime, Elke, can you talk about the mental aspect of endurance sports and endurance running? And how did you train and prepare for this expedition?
Training and preparing for this expedition comes from a culmination of many years of running ultra marathons. We always say, the first half is physical and the second half is mental. And that's really true. So, I have found over the years, in particular, longer races like 100Ks or 100 milers, that it's better to break it up into segments instead of thinking of what the overall goal is like, you wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to run 100 miles today. I wake up thinking I'm going to run this section to the next section to the next section until I've accomplished my overall goal. Things to look forward to, like in a race, you've got aid stations where you're thinking, you get really psyched up about, I get to have a Coke. That's the only time I ever drink Coke is during races. Or boiled potatoes with salt on them, or I get to see my friends at this aid station or that aid station. So it's little things like that. We like to say whenever you're taking on something really big, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So instead of thinking of the overall goal, you break it up into smaller sections that your mind can digest a little more easily.
Yeah, otherwise, it's so overwhelming. It's overwhelming to think about the large picture sometimes.
Yes, it can be. So in preparation for this expedition, it was really the same thing. I thought, we'll break it down into days and find which day you expect to be the hardest. And that was day 3 for me. That was a long day. And we went through Camp of Death. We went down the North Fork, up onto the Forest Hill Divide to Iowa Hill. And we had a lot of climbing that day. And, it was to be an emotional day going through Camp of Death. And also that climb out of the North Fork was something physically I had to prepare myself for. So once you're prepared for that, knowing that you've done very difficult challenges in the past, that helps to propel you forward for whatever's coming. And it worked, absolutely.
So was day 3 just very physically difficult, or was it kind of the buildup of a couple days, or the mental aspect, or kind of all of it? What was it about that day?
It was, in the first couple of hours, we went through the Camp of Death. So that emotional pause there to really honor the people who had perished there and all that occurred in that area, that mental, emotional combination can really take it out of you. And then you kind of have to just rebuild and move on, because after that is really where it became more physically challenging. Going across Sawtooth Ridge, 7 miles of just pure beauty, looking around at the canyons that were all around us on either side. And just trying to get into their mental picture of the forlorn hope, probably realizing at that point that they were probably off course, and then having to dip down into the North Fork and make that climb up onto the Forest Hill Divide. It was a good, tough climb, but we had a lot of fun actually doing it, I think. And then into the night, we had our headlamps on running into Iowa Hill to meet our crew. So it was about a 13-hour day that day of nonstop movement.
Yeah, and some places I imagine have just kind of an energy about it because of the past. So that always just kind of is there just because of, even prior to the Donner Party. Who knows? There might just be this kind of energy that's, in an area because of what might have happened in a place.
Yeah, there are several stories from that day. I don't want to hog up Jenn's time, so maybe she wants to share some of
Yeah,
those stories, but yeah, definitely on that day.
Mhm.
great. Well, we can
Sorry,
kind
my 10-year-old unplugged our Wi-Fi, so
of.
I left you guys for a moment. Everybody just froze, so I'm not sure what I missed. Uh,
Well, we're happy to have you back.
we can start
Um,
again with me if you'd like to.
yeah. So, Jennifer, you also have a lot of experience in ultra running. For instance, you've completed over 50 endurance events. Can you please share with us how you became interested in ultra running and these activities?
Yeah, sure. I grew up on the East Coast, so I am from the Boston area. I moved to the White Mountains when I was 12, and I have always been interested in running. And as a young girl, I used to watch my sister do road marathons. And as Elke pointed out, road marathons beat you up a lot. And at that time in my life, we would run track together. When I was 6 years old, I would follow her on the track. I would go to the Boston Marathon and watch her complete it. As a young woman, she was 17 at the time, that's quite young to be running your first Boston Marathon. So she always encouraged me. And when I was 12 and moved to the White Mountains, I told her that there was a cross country team where we ran in the woods. So I was very excited about this idea that you would run, but in the woods. And that was my whole happiness, was running outside my back door in the White Mountains. And I was lucky enough to go to a school where my dad was a teacher, and I was part of a big family of teachers who would take you rock climbing at Rumney, and they would take you out canoeing. And in the cross country team coach was also, a friend and someone that I saw on a daily basis, eating meals together. So I went to a really special school where we were encouraged to get out into the woods as much as possible. So I ran cross country. I switched to field hockey, but when I went to college, I decided to join the cross country and track team there as well, in addition to being a hockey player. So running was still my fun sport, and hockey was my serious sport. And when I left college, I just kept running everywhere I lived. I just put on my shoes and go see the trail. So I didn't know about ultra running at all. I thought I was kind of a weird person for always wanting to be on a trail without a bib, whereas everyone else seemed to want to go on a road and have a bib and get a PR. And that didn't interest me at all. So I just loved trails, and I didn't realize that there were people as strange as I was until after I'd had Sophia, who's now 17. I was running for the millionth time in a place called Cool, California, and a man stopped me and said, "Hey, what are you doing? Are you training for the Way to Cool 50K?" And I said, "No, I have no idea what that is." And he said, "Oh, you should come and join us. We've got this great race." And it put a little seed in my mind that there were people out there running by themselves the distances that I was running. As Elke said, once you have kids, you can't really get away for multi-day trips. So I was just trying to run as long as possible when I got free time. And I had always known of a race called Western States, and I had wanted to run it in my sister's honor. She had passed away when I was 15, and she was 27, and she never got to run trails. And I'd heard of a race where you could run 100 miles in the Sierras or on the trails. And I always thought that would be something she would have really loved. So it took me a little while to realize that the trails I've been running on for 7 to 8 years were the Western States trails. And the day that I found that out, I went home on this thing called a computer, and I logged on, and I saw that there was, in fact, one more qualifier to get into Western States that year. And I said, "Oh, I have to do that." So I said to my husband, "Bring the baby to me at mile 25 and I'll breastfeed him, and then I'll finish this race." So it was the Helen Klein 50 right here on the American River. And I just set off on a 50-mile run without ever having done that. And I used someone's cell phone at about mile 20 and said, "Don't bring the baby to me at mile 25, because I'm not sitting down. I'm just going to run straight through." And so, that was my first ultra, was to just say, I'll just run straight through. I qualified for Western States and put my name in the hat. And unlike Elke, I did not get picked. and I did not get picked the next year or the next or the next. So I continued to qualify for Western States, I think for 7 years, and volunteered all 3 days of the race, sometimes more. And 7 years later, Trish and Chuck Godfredson, the aid station captains who I'd been working for all those years, they gave me a golden ticket to run Western States because I just wasn't getting picked in the lottery. So that was my first time, 2015. So I had done many ultras before then, but I'd wanted Western States to be my first 100. But I had to run 100 to qualify for Western States. So in fact, my first 100 was not Western States. But it was my favorite race ever. I had a fantastic day, and I just love the Western States community is everything to me. And trail running is everything to me. So I just like to volunteer. I don't know when I'll get in again. I'm back up to another 7 years of trying to get in. You know, we all just take our turn. But in the meantime, I run many, many ultras, and I do a lot of personal racing without a bib on, just like I used to do. So I do a lot of run around Lake Tahoe in one go with friends, or go out and do something on my own like Elke does. And that's really where I find my joy, and it makes it more efficient to do it all at once than to split it up into multi-days. So that's my love. I also love adventure racing, and I was on Eco Challenge Fiji, which is a TV show on Amazon, where the world's toughest race. We were with Team Curl. It was my very first adventure race in my typical fashion. My first adventure race was the world's toughest 12-day. So trial by fire as a rookie, doing adventure racing. And so that is a new sport that I've been really getting drawn into. And I have a lot of new ideas about the way you can travel through the world. Just now you don't just have to run, you can actually link together your paddling, your climbing, your snowshoeing, your mountain biking, and just link it into one big adventure. So that's really what I love to do.
Absolutely. Combine all the different activities into certain events. Yeah,
if you meet water, you just go through it, you swim it, or you paddle it. If you don't want to run anymore, you get on your bike. So it's a really fabulous sport that I've been lucky to meet some great teams who are the best in the world, who are happy to pass on all their tips and tricks and knowledge. So.
Well, that's awesome. Did you ever get to the point where you could run 25 miles, take a little bit to breastfeed, and then just finish off 25 miles?
I actually, what I would do was finish my run and never hang out and tailgate after, like a lot of people do. I would just get in my car, drive straight home. I never actually met my baby out on the trail to breastfeed, no. But it made for some very uncomfortable running, I have to tell you.
Oh,
and I do have a mountaineering story where I had to bring my breast pumps, and I didn't know how to get out of the tent without waking up my teammates and spilling the milk on them, and I drank it. I actually drank my own breast milk and got so violently ill that they thought I had mountain sickness. This was climbing Shasta, and I couldn't figure out why I would be so sick. And I thought, I don't feel like I have high altitude sickness, but I couldn't stop throwing up. And finally, I said to them, well, I did drink my own breast milk at about 2 a.m. And they said, ah!
I didn't know you're not supposed to do that.
It was probably the altitude. It's probably the altitude and maybe, you know, the richness of breast milk. Your body probably is like drinking, you know, butter or something. Who knows?
I remember thinking as I held the 2 little bottles of hot milk, well, it's hot milk and I'm really cold, so how bad could this be? And I just
and then you learned. Yeah.
And then I learned, and a lot of people love to tell that story, because I just remember sitting there between my two teammates thinking, well, we have to start going up to the top of Shasta in about 2 hours. I don't want to wake them up, and I sure didn't bring caps for this milk, so I don't know how to get out of the tent in the snow and not spill it on them. So it just was a funny moment where you know.
You had to improvise.
Improvise. I've experienced everything. I might be the only person that drank their own breast milk while mountaineering.
That might be a first.
Might be a first.
Yeah, I'm gonna call Guinness Book of World Records. We're gonna get that in there.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Jennifer, can you talk about your first big snowshoe expedition into the winter wilderness of the White Mountains? And how did that influence you to lead trips with Outward Bound?
Well, I didn't realize how unusual it was at the time, but growing up and seeing what my kids experience, I didn't realize that my high school was so unique and that they valued the aspects of outdoor challenges so much that they would stop school in the spring, and as a rite of passage, all the juniors would put on wool pants and wool tops, just your basic Army gear. You'd put on everybody borrowed gear from the school, so you'd put on these big boots. You had some really smelly clothes from the previous 20 years of people using them for this purpose. We would put backpacks on, and they would either drop us off 10 at a time in the mountains, or we would leave from our school that was in the woods and walk from there. And for 2 weeks, we would go out into the White Mountains with our teachers, about 8 kids to 2 teachers, 10 kids to 2 teachers. And all we had was a green tarp, matches, food, and these wool clothes. And we spent 2 weeks in the snowshoeing in the White Mountains. There was one group that would use skis and ski pokes, but some of us had no experience doing this. Some kids knew something about it, but we were left for 3 days alone during that time with just a journal and a pencil. And you would think about your life, and you would be left with a little bit of food and a way to make a fire and one green tarp and one string. And you had to live for 3 days and not see anyone. So we just had a ball being with our classmates out in the woods like this. You would really get to know your classmates in a way that you didn't know them. And the fact that we just had wool clothes and a green tarp from Home Depot, and we made it through epic winter snowstorms, rainstorms. And I just found that to be just part of the fabric of growing up. And I thought, well, the woods aren't anything to be scared of, that they're really fun and you can have this great time. And that is the way I feel about nature in the wilderness. I just feel very much at home out there, and I feel like I'm one with it. And that has influenced me. I'm not scared of anything. I'm more scared of technical things, rock climbing perhaps, or things where things can go wrong. But as far as my relationship with winter in the woods, it helped me see the forlorn hope in a way where I was able to think, what would it feel like to be a teenager, facing the snow with very little, obviously very different. I had wool clothes, and I did have something to sleep under, but I imagine they did too. But I feel like I was kind of made for this trip because I did see that through the lens of being a young girl, just like the women on this trip, and feeling the same feelings of, sometimes fear or the cold, or just being scared of the weather conditions. It helped me a little bit see the amount of fear and suffering they must have experienced. So that it did make me feel like I was the perfect person for this trip and understanding. And I really loved having Elke with me because I feel she's also someone who has a very positive relationship with winter and has overcome fears and challenges that we have being in the cold, that we're able to perhaps bring this story to the world. We weren't out there to prove anything endurance wise or prove anything speed wise. We were trying to put ourselves in their spiritual shoes and imagine how that must have been as mothers and as young women.
Absolutely.
So.
And so these experiences you had at an earlier age kind of inspired you for these trips, but also to lead trips with youth through Outward Bound. Is that right?
Yeah, I really primarily focus on people just understanding that it's joyful to be outside. It's not something that you should feel you have to suffer through. And I always want people to feel the joy and watching the sun come up over the snow. And so for me, it was natural to want to lead outdoor trips. The one thing you will find is that everyone comes to outdoor trips in their own way. So sometimes teenagers who are sent on Outward Bound and not told by their parents what they're getting into aren't feeling so joyful about 30 days of no showers and, none of the things there that they're used to. and working through those issues with maybe angry kids or upset kids it's something it's a process, trying to get them on board with this idea that this is joyful. And I love that. What I really love most of all is taking my children, my daughter and her friends. I've been taking them out on whitewater rafting and expeditions since they were little, and always having fun with it, not making it a grind or something that's unpleasant. So I love the idea of bringing people out into the woods and making sure they have a good time and showing them that they can be safe. They can be safe and it's okay. We have each other to rely on. So in fact, I'm planning to do a outward bound style trip for Sophia and her friends in late March. We are taking them out and they're going to do a solo like I did in high school because they've missed so much with COVID. I thought this would be a great rite of passage for them. And they're really excited to go out into the snow and spend 3 days alone.
Wow. Okay, so you're recreating your experience for
Yeah,
Sophia and her friends.
Yeah, and my high school still does this to this day. Holderness School still holds Outback, which is that rite of passage they do for juniors. And it will still be held this year. And you can look it up. It's a great program.
That's awesome. My first instinct is to think that sounds terrible. I'm like, that sounds like the worst, most awful thing that I could think of. But I really understand that. I've led some trips before and I've led trail crew out there, and it really builds your confidence and builds your character, and you really start to understand things about yourself when you're out there for that long period of time, kind of with yourself and enduring, but also problem solving. You're thinking, how can I arrange this tarp in a way that's gonna, maybe ricochet the wind off of it so I'm not getting beaten with wind at night, or how can I organize my things so I'm maximizing warmth and safety.
You nailed it. It's confidence building. I remember my first night of solo, I set up my tarp and I got pine branches and I made a little bed of pine branches, and I felt very smart. And I woke up outside the tarp with snow falling on me. And I thought, what went wrong? But I had built it on a slope and I'd slid right out from underneath the tarp. And so I spent the next day problem solving that and thinking, okay, tonight I'm not going to slide out into the snow. So yes, it built confidence.
Yeah, and then when you go ahead.
I think just listening to you guys, I think it's so important to challenge your brain in ways that you don't normally do throughout your everyday life. You're not thinking when you're working or when you're going to school these types of things. So I think it's important to create the whole person, a well-rounded person, by having these kinds of challenges that are, again, out of the normal.
Yeah, it's practical knowledge.
It
You're
is.
applying, what you're learning in school into an actual real world scenario.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So what were some things that might have surprised you on this expedition? I'll ask you, Elke. Some things that you weren't expecting, that you were kind of surprised out there. And did you learn anything unexpected about yourself or your teammates?
It's a great question. First of all, this expedition was unlike any expedition or adventure, as I would put some of my other experiences, unlike anything I'd ever done before, in that we were following the footsteps of a historical story of the Forlorn Hope. And it's not something where I would say, oh, I'm going to hike the High Sierra Trail and I'll do these 8 peaks along the way. This is totally different. It was historical. It took some research and trying to get myself caught up in that 5 weeks of the history of it all, meeting with the team, everything else, things I wouldn't normally do when I'm out doing my own solo adventures. What I wasn't prepared for is how involved I would get in trying to put myself into the mindset of the Forlorn Hope, in that, what were they thinking on any given day? What were some of the sorrows? There must have been some bright points too, of just stopping and saying, despite the fact that we're starved, that we're suffering, this is still beautiful. It's this beautiful country where they'd come from didn't look anything like where they were now. And of course, where they were going to. So just pulling all that into my own mental outlook was something I wasn't quite prepared for. When I first said yes, I was thinking, okay, 100 miles over 5 days, I can do this, you know, that type of thing. But you're not really taking into account the history of it until you're really out there and you're immersed in it. So, you know, while I really look up to Bob and Tim for doing all the background work on this over 7 years, so passionate about learning the history, working with different historians, reading everything they could possibly get their hands on, and then going out there and doing the actual footwork to find the actual route. They had done all the hard work. I just felt like I needed to show up and be there, be ready to absorb it all and be up for the challenge. But again, as we went on, and each day brought us something new, whether it was snowshoeing, taking the snowshoes off, whether it was, you know, being soaking wet and having to hang our clothes out to dry over a fire, and sleeping in a pretty wet tent and waking up to freezing cold, to crossing the North Fork a couple of times and being a bit uncomfortable with that, not really knowing what that might be like. Those are all really great things to throw into it to make it more authentic.
Yeah, there's a really great video for our viewers on forlornhope.org. I think it's a 2-minute long video that kind of recaps some of the terrain that y'all were crossing. Crossing creeks, climbing up steep hills, and kind of bushwhacking a lot. I saw there's a lot of trying to navigate over craggly branches that were kind of crisscrossed, and you have your snowshoes on, trying to like aim them through the narrow little openings of all these little like twigs and branches and things.
There were some surprises there. So day 2, we were going from Big Bend to our second night of camp near Onion Valley, and we thought it was going to be a bit of a break from day 1. And so, you know, mentally we were kind of ready for an easier day. And then going through 6 Mile Valley, which was such a pleasant surprise how beautiful that was. Coming out from there, we encountered what ended up being quite a bit of whitethorn. And the whitethorn, I don't know if you know what whitethorn is, Jeremy, but it's I've been a trail steward on the Western States Trail since 2005, doing trail work, and I'm also a sawyer. I do a lot of saw work too. And one of our nemesis is, if that's a word, out on the Western States Trail in the high country is whitethorn, and it's a brush. It's a really hardy brush, and it thrives in post-fire areas. Has these long needles, and it's nasty, and it's thick. And you know, we call it the game of thorns instead of the game when we're tackling that with our saws in the high country. But anyway, we had to trek across this, and it was kind of spongy because it only had maybe, you know, 3 to 5 inches of snow on top. So we were kind of falling down in it. The guys were falling down in it and, you know, helping them get back up, getting their snowshoes tangled in it. So that was something that we had to deal with that we weren't quite prepared for. And it took quite a while. I think we had an hour and a half of whitethorn that we had to cross. It was pretty brutal. And then of course, just bushwhacking and going through Burnett Canyon and going up the other side into Forest Hill Divide. Those were challenges that were both unforeseeable and foreseeable.
Yeah, and
we had a saying that no easy day on the Forlorn Hope, because, you know, the first day was the elevation gain, and the second day was the whitethorn and the rain and the freezing cold, making camp early because we were sopping wet, had to take off all of our clothes. And the next morning, you know, we had added a couple extra miles to an already very long day. And we started out needing spikes because the road up to Texas Hill is so steep. And then, as Elke said, the emotion of going through Camp of Death. And so every day seemed like, okay, these are the physical challenges. We knew those were coming. But then day 3, we didn't quite know where we were going to cross the river. And then you come up into Colfax and there's cars and there's highways, and you think, well, now surely, you know, there won't be any problems. But every morning was brutally cold. In fact, the fourth morning going to Johnson's Ranch was the coldest
fifth.
morning we'd experienced.
Yeah.
Was that
The fifth morning, our final morning. Yeah.
the last morning was
It was cold.
the coldest morning. And we thought, it's impossible that it is so much colder here than it was when we started. But we didn't have places to sleep one night, and we had to cast about for a home while waiting on the side of the road to find out where we could sleep. We became almost hypothermic, and where cars are passing us, there's a road right there. But just like the Forlorn Hope, there was no easy days, and there's always a new set of challenges to solve. But we were able to laugh and have a good time with it, and think, we really have to put ourselves in the mindset of people who had to keep solving challenges as well.
Right.
No easy day on the Forlorn Hope, not for us and not for the pioneers.
No, and to that end too, on that day we had running clothes on, so we didn't have the heavier layers that we had in the high country. We weren't quite prepared to be that cold, but at least we knew at night we would be in our warm clothes and our sleeping bags, even though we slept outside every single night. But we knew that we would have shelter, and we would have food, and we would have warm, dry clothes.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Jeremy, about what was the biggest challenge, Elke touched on a lot of it, but I would say that one thing that surprised me and was a challenge was that I had a lot of emotionality about not just being in the footsteps and being in the same places, because the spirits were very strong for me. The feeling that we were doing something they needed us to do and wanted us to do. But I really found myself missing my family. And in particular, coming out of the North Fork and traveling into the night and getting to camp late, I remember crying in the tent at night. I was sad. I missed my family. And mostly because I was trying to picture how hard it must have been for them laying there 33 nights in a row, not knowing if what they were doing was going to succeed, whether they would live or not. Would they also die and need to be eaten by their teammates? Would they make it? Was their family still alive? These things would really weigh on you. You wouldn't know if you were going to survive the next day, the next week, and if it even mattered. And in fact, 6 of them gave up 6 miles from the ranch, and only one person, William Eddy, had the constitution to keep going. But the other 6 had essentially given up and said, this is as far as I can go. And that was surprising, that I would lay in bed at night and get very sad. And sometimes while hiking, I would be hit by a terrible sadness about how, when you love someone and you want to help them and save them, sometimes we're faced with this idea that we have to be so strong, because sometimes you don't know if what you're doing is going to result in success, but the important thing is to keep going. And William Eddy carried right through to that house and knocked on the door. And even then, he didn't know how he was going to get back there physically to then save his family. And that to me is remarkable, that he had the strength, and that the women and the other members had the strength to stay alive. It must have been very hard to stay alive in the face of such odds. So I was very emotional about my life, my choices, and how I would feel if I was in the same position as these people. Thinking about my children starving and suffering back at Donner Lake, and would that drive me forward, or would it overwhelm me? Would it overwhelm me and make me stop? I don't think so, but you actually have to think about these things, and we're getting older and we're getting faced with these situations, how to help others in our world when we feel overwhelmingly helpless.
Well, it's amazing too, the power that wanting to help others, especially to help them to survive, can take all of your own discomfort, your own agony, and just put it on the back burner, because you're not thinking about yourself, you're thinking about others. And again, that's what propelled me forward. was knowing what they were doing in 1846.
Mhm.
The
It's
sacrifice
also very
they were
impressive.
making for other people. Yeah.
Yeah, and they had also survived an arduous journey just to get to Donner Lake,
Mhm.
going through the Great Salt Lake Desert, 80 miles of no water, and they're just emaciated and dehydrated and lips are cracked. And that's them just getting into Donner Lake and then facing the winter. So they were already at just a massive disadvantage. It's hard to even comprehend how William Eddy could actually finish and try to, make contact with these Miwok people to get help.
Mhm.
Like,
Right.
that's so
right.
impressive.
And, there are things, Jeremy, that are really obvious about, like what you just pointed out. And the fact that the clothes, everything else they wore was completely tattered. Their shoes were totally gone. But there are things like Charles Stanton was snow blinded, but they all had to have been snow blinded. And they didn't have sunblock. Imagine what their skin was like and their lips on any given day. They're just constantly exposed to the elements, and how uncomfortable that is. When I did that 3-day trek, I didn't have adequate snow or sunblock, I should say. And my face I was unrecognizable. My face just swelled up. My lips were blistered and oozing.
Oh,
and
I've been there. Yeah.
3 days. That was only 3 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
They
do
don't
you
have wraparound reflective sunglasses, with the side, blinds, make sure you're protecting your eyes.
Yeah.
Well, and also they had big, one thing that is a really big part of the history of it is that imagine if you're all getting along and you know where you're going, but then imagine if you don't know where you're going and you don't necessarily agree on which way to go. Who makes that decision? And then does that person then be blamed later for why did you make that choice? And they had been beset with that since the trip began. Making the choice to follow Hastings was certainly a huge bone of contention for the families. They blamed each other. There was anger. There was a feeling of desperation that all their choices they were making were wrong. And coming into these 17 people breaking off to try this, they thought they had Charles Stanton, and he was quickly, not in the equation anymore. So imagine facing the North Fork and facing Burnett Canyon and facing those things and not knowing whether anyone really knew what they were doing. So you just leads to a lot of emotional distress. You're not just on a journey like we are in a 100-mile race where we have markers telling us where to go. They were probably standing at every moment and going, who thinks we should go that way? How exhausting. It's not even like point and shoot. It's let's talk about it. The Indians, are they leading us the wrong way on purpose? One person saying we should eat them and other people disagreeing strongly. That's murder. And Charles Stanton making the choice to stay behind meant the Indians were then faced with people they didn't know and that weren't loyal to them. And William Eddy having to decide to tell the Indians to leave so that they won't be used for food. And that must have made him unpopular with members who thought that they should be used for food. These are questions we still grapple with. And then just the decisions, how to cannibalize the bodies and when to. This is a small part. We don't want people to focus on that, but that must have been emotionally really hard decisions, right? To say, well, okay, this is your family, so we'll use your family and you use our family, and just decisions about survival and which way to go. That just adds a layer of they have to get along, but also I'm sure there must have been a lot of decisions that they didn't agree with that were being made along the way, but you have to continue on as a group. And
You're doomed to be alone. Yes.
They must have had many decisions where they had to choose who was the leader and who to trust. And
yeah, we did talk about that along the way too.
Yeah, who was the leader? We don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not to mention their, somewhat primitive equipment. So, I mean, the original Forlorn Hope Party of 1846 fashioned their own snowshoes using wagon parts and items from nature. So luckily, your expedition was able to use modern snowshoes and modern equipment, and you got to bring some ample food. So one of my favorite trail snacks is Stroop waffles. I love like the crispy waffle with like little honey in there, a little chewy. Would y'all be able to give us a little tour of some of the equipment that you use? Maybe your snowshoes or backpacks, or I don't know if you're using Gore-Tex jackets. Maybe we could start. Do you have your snowshoes with you that we can kind of take a look at
Yeah.
a little bit of your gear?
You and Tim. Tim loves Troop waffles. Tim and Bob. Tim had.
They really just hit the spot.
I ended up bringing these instead of my MSRs simply because the MSRs are for more icy conditions and they're very aggressive. These are more, what I like to use for sort of lighter snow conditions. So the snowshoes I wore.
So they're aluminum, kind of lightweight with little spikes at the bottom.
Yeah, they've got spikes at the bottom. That's right.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and these are
as aggressive as my other ones, though.
These are mine. These are Dion's. They're handmade in Vermont from a guy who makes, so they have really big teeth and they're very lightweight. These were adequate for what we were doing. So, and I really I love how light they are. And I love that they have Velcro. So yeah, and we can show you some more stuff. So do you have boots? I mean, I can start from the bottom. Here's my snowshoes.
Yes, please. Yeah.
And here are my boots. I've got these nice, I don't know, Keen boots.
Yep.
Nice white toe box.
These are what I wore every day through the North Fork until I changed into running shoes at Iowa Hill. So these fit right into the snowshoe. And I think probably the most important thing are long wool socks. I wore these every single day, all the way up to my knees until we started running probably.
I layered my socks because I started out this trip with a nasty, it wasn't even a blister. It was from when our team met about 10 days earlier and we did a little bit of snowshoeing and just, kind of went out there in the Royal Gorge area. I developed a blister and it was pretty good size and just tore the skin off the back of my heel. So I started.
You already started off that way.
I did. So I was completely bandaged up and layers of socks. And if there was a time I could take my snowshoes off and just wear my boots only, it helped to prevent some of that heel slippage. But that was not fun. But again, kind of felt authentic, right? I had my own discomfort.
They must have had a lot of we had, so we had gaiters to keep all the snow.
Oh, good. Okay.
And I basically just wore running tights. A lot of the time, even in the freezing cold, I just wore Lycra tights. And my snowshoes kick a lot of snow onto my butt. So if that got uncomfortable, I just put waterproof rain pants on, lightweight waterproof rain pants on top of the situation.
Which I did too. And one of the hidden benefits to gaiters, these Gore-Tex gaiters, we all, I think, had similar gaiters, is when we were going through the whitethorn, it protected us. We didn't feel the whitethorn at all, didn't tear up our clothes because we all had gaiters on. And I wore them all the way until we got to Iowa Hill, simply because going through, all the bushwhacking that we did, going through Burnett Canyon and up the other side of the North Fork, the gaiters were really helpful to protect us from the brambles and that type of thing.
We had different, like most of the time you just wore these very simple gloves. What would happen was they would get very wet. So what I would do, I depending on the temperature, I would just take these off, put them in my bra to dry out like that, and just have bare hands until they were warmer and then put them back on. So I remember teaching Tim that trick, like his hands would be very cold because once these get wet, your hands are freezing. So just take them out, put them under your armpits and your body heat will dry them out. But if it got too uncomfortable, I would just put something like this on. But for most of the time, if you're out there, you're just gonna need a simple glove. And
your bodies are working, so you're probably burning a lot of energy and kind of developing a lot of heat. So you were saying you were kind of wearing kind of minimal when you're actually being active, right?
Like a zip shirt. This is a smart wool.
Yeah.
Basically, like our,
I wore my Exoskin top. Exoskin is synthetic and it has copper in it. So it keeps you warm without much weight, with minimal layer. And it also doesn't overheat you when you have to shed layers, which is exactly what you end up doing as you warm up throughout the day.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I always have base layers of wool too, merino wool.
These are our base layers, just a smart wool. You just start with that. And then you'd have your exo skin if it was really cold. And then usually I wore this every day, which is just a really lightweight jacket. That's as much as you can really handle without getting too hot. You know, like you said, the wool, the exoskin, and then a smart wool. You might be broiling at that point. But if it's raining, you have to wear a shell.
Yes, which I wore on, what was that, day 2, because it snowed nonstop that day. Which is great.
When you get to camp, you put on your big old
big puffy.
Yes.
But when you're out there, you always have to carry at least a lightweight puffy, because someone could get injured or need to fix their blister or fix their strap on their snowshoe, and you just get cold fast. So you have to put this on right away, put on your hat, and you know, just be ready that, you know, you might think you're going to be moving and be a certain temperature, but the smallest thing, stopping for 5 minutes to talk to someone, it can send you right down the path of hypothermia.
It can, especially when you're wet, right? So having dry clothes is everything. And of course, sunglasses.
This is a good, we made these Forlorn Hope buffs.
Oh, cool.
You can basically blow your nose on them and cover your whole face, or wear it as a hat. Or what I do in the summer is I wear it here and I wipe all my, you know,
all the juices coming from the face. Yeah.
Or wash yourself, everything. You know, so these are a big deal to have. You gotta have definitely, but you try to keep it minimal. Just, you know, always have the same base layers, right? Every day using the same exact thing and just adding the layer as it gets colder and more serious.
That's one thing about wool is, not to do a sales job, but it doesn't retain odors. So you're not stinky over days, unlike, you know, synthetics do. So that's one of the bonuses of wool.
Yeah, I'd say, and like I said, when we were 15, we wore just your traditional, like LL being like a big wool shirt with really stinky propylene, like really disgusting smell of that.
It seems to smell instantly. That's what I've noticed. Like you wear it for an hour and all of a sudden you're like, sorry, everybody, you're like trying to keep your like shoulders closed. So your armpits
locks in, like you can't get it out.
And your whole body smells. And then you, especially when you're borrowing it from the previous 10 years of Outward Bound kids, like you're putting on a little crunchy propylene and then putting a wool, and it soaks in we also had this, soaks in all the campfire odors. Here's my artist. Hi.
Hey, Sophia.
Hey, Sophia.
Hi. This is Jeremy from. Is it not like a formal thing? Well, it's formal, but you're on a Zoom. Now you're on the.
You're on the interview. You made it.
She's a great snowshoer as well. She's done the snowshoe races with me, and she'll be doing that Outward Bound trip with her friends in March. So she'll have some more experience under her belt in the Sierras.
Well, awesome. Thank you for showing us the little gear rundown. That's really useful for people like wanting to kind of get into the sport or making sure that they're safe out there, getting out there and making sure that they have the right equipment and they know kind of how to keep their bodies in good condition. Mm-hmm. So it's really cool to see what y'all brought on this. So in addition to visiting forlornhope.org, are there any other ways that we can follow you on your journeys? Do you have any upcoming adventures that are planned that we can follow you on? Do you have any social media that we could follow you on? Or
we do on Facebook. We have a Forlorn Hope group, and that has grown tremendously, and we keep it up and running. We see that people are keeping that alive with additional history of the Donner Party and Forlorn Hope. And it's also good for educational purposes as well. So that is on there under Forlorn Hope, under the group page on Facebook.
Yeah, and we are hoping to do some, people have been asking for guided trail trekking and historical trail trekking of the parts of the Forlorn Hope Trail that are open to the public. There was a lot of private land that we cross that we got special permission for, but there are sections where we
Yeah.
can show people the journey in segments. And so that is something that we've been asked to do and will do, probably not right now with the snowpack the way it is, but
And COVID.
we'll do
Yeah.
updates on the website. Personally, I have a new Eco Challenge team, Team American River. So if and when Eco Challenge comes back to TV, Team American River, where we all live here on the American River, different parts of it, our journey will be viewed through the Eco Challenge Patagonia. So that's something, but that's, we don't know with COVID and everything that's going on when Eco Challenge will come back to TV, but.
Great. I love to follow you when you kind of illuminate some of the accessible parts of the Forlorn Hope Expedition Trail. We have a ton of passionate volunteers, and I'd love to connect with you on that at some point. Maybe we, kind of go out with some of our volunteers who are interpreting the Forlorn Hope and the Donner Party on a essentially daily basis. They're talking to the public constantly and educating everybody, doing school field trips. It might be a good thing for them an opportunity for them to explore physically actually some of the trail.
We would love that. We'd love that.
And we do want to say that, the folks who helped us, the Donner Summit Historical Society, great place to visit. At the Johnson Ranch, we want to, and going forward, we are hoping to support their efforts to get the Johnson Ranch historically recognized and protected so that people can come to visit that and see that part of the journey, which is really powerful. And also putting together a curriculum for fourth grade. I have a fourth grader, so I'm working with their school. The kids have been reading the Donner, Patty Reed's Doll. So we're hoping to do a curriculum that coincides with that in the fourth grade for California kids, and showing them some real life parts of this trip so that they can learn about that in school. So I'm kind of doing a pilot project with my son's class at Gold River. So that'll be fun. I know Bob is also working on perhaps a book or a children's book that would help with education efforts. So
and we're open. We're open to meeting with classrooms and via Zoom and groups to talk about Forlorn Hope and our expedition as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. And we're just so grateful that you all brought attention to the Forlorn Hope. I think this really kind of revitalized people's awareness of this Forlorn Hope expedition, but as well as, the Donner Party. People kind of gained this kind of renewed interest after seeing your expedition. And the forlornhope.org is such a well-organized site. I just want to plug that one more time. There's a great timeline with photos and all the people in the original expedition, as well as highlighting this reprise. It's just a wealth of information. So we'll stay connected. I'm actually going to be collaborating with REI coming up for some kind of recreational type interpretive program. So maybe I'll see if y'all want to do a little guest appearance, a little cameo.
Oh, that would be fun. Love
we
that.
would love that. We're open to anything.
We are
so grateful to bring attention to the story. Like you said, we knew Donner Party very well, and we didn't know this story for a long time. So this has been really fantastic.
Excellent. Okay, great. Well, this concludes our episode of the Sierra Speaker Series with Jennifer Hemmen and Elke Reimer. Jennifer and Elke are part of a 4-member team of ultra-distance athletes who share a passion for history and aim to honor the lives and courage of the Forlorn Hope members of the historic Donner Party of 1846. So please visit forlornhope.org for more information and photographs of Jennifer and Elke's recent expedition that began on December 16th and concluded on December 20th, 2020. This interview has been brought to you by California State Parks and the Sierra State Parks Foundation. Please donate to the Sierra State Parks Foundation today to support the interpretation, restoration, and preservation of the park system in the Lake Tahoe Donner area. Your tax-deductible donation will be kept locally and applied only to priority projects. Please visit sierrastateparks.org to see how you can get involved and access a full list of upcoming events. Feel free to contact me, California State Park Interpreter Jeremy Lin. I'm at Donner Memorial State Park if you have any questions or just want to connect about the nature, the culture, and the history. All right, Elke, Jennifer, thank you all so much. And I'm sure we'll be in touch and we'll do other programs together. We'll collaborate.
Thanks so much, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. It's been really fun.
Yes.
All right,
Good
y'all.
seeing you, Jen.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.